You don't make money off of well people unless you're paid to keep people well. And in ancient Chinese medicine, the doctor was paid to keep you well. If you got sick, he didn't get paid. And we probably should go back to some form of that, but that's not the way it works.
My name is Michael Rubino.
I'm on a personal mission to make sure you don't get sick inside your own home.
I knew there was something wrong. I'm just so relieved there's something that you can do about it.
Thank you for watching and joining us for another episode of Never Been Sicker. I'm your host, Michael Rubino, and today's very special guest, please welcome Dr. Ann Dunev. Dr. Ann, thank you so much for being here, taking time out of your busy day.
It is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So the podcast is called Never Been Sicker. So I want to dive right in.
Okay.
It's unfortunate, right? But we have never been sicker than we are today. Do you agree with that?
I would say that has to be true. There are so many vectors and influences these days that didn't exist for our ancestors and didn't even exist really for our grandparents. So it is a whole new world.
Whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
And a sick one at that.
Well, I just listened to a podcast recently, and there were two guys from England, and one of them was saying, I really love being in America. I always love the opportunities, and I've done really well here. He said, but everything in America is conspiring to kill us.
So true.
And I think that's really true when you think about every aspect. I mean, our bodies are actually still analog. They're not digital. All this technology is really great, but it's not good for our health.
I was about to say that too, because basically with the advancements in medicine and technology, one would think that you would get healthier. But you're here to tell us that that's not exactly true.
Well, that's not only not exactly true, but there's too many commercial interests to make sure that's not true. I mean, you don't make money off of well people unless you're paid to keep people well. And in ancient Chinese medicine, the doctor was paid to keep you well. If you got sick, he didn't get paid. And we probably should go back to some form of that, but that's not the way it works. I just had a patient in the other day, for example, who has something pretty serious going on, probably, an early cancer. And they told her there's absolutely nothing that they can do until it gets worse. And I assume that that's because the treatment is too toxic. And so now what is she going to do? Except sit around and wait for a cancer to get worse.
Wow. So you're a PhD,
Mm-hmm.
but you're a businesswoman as well.
Right.
So you know a little bit about statistics.
I do. Mm-hmm.
Good. So statistics going up statistics going down statistics.
Right.
It seems to me like we might be rewarding down statistics in terms of our healthcare.
Well, we're rewarding it in terms of the commercial interests, the pharmaceutical, the insurance companies, the hospitals, and the medical providers. But our statistics as human beings and as healthy human beings are definitely going down, while their statistics for making money are going up. So there's sort of this inverse relationship between the two. And I think that it's really difficult for people. We've been taught to trust doctors, and I think that many doctors have really good intentions, but I also think they're miseducated because they're educated to think that the only thing you can do is test the body and give a drug depending on what comes up when you test. And so there's almost no prevention at all. And in fact, if you think about the way we eat and our lifestyles and our environment, the environment we create, because being outside has been very healthy for human beings. We're not outside anymore. And we're outside less and less. And going to the gym is not a substitute for being outside and moving around and having sun and having, movement. We think of exercise as, go to the gym and get on the treadmill and lift weights. But, this is a new science experiment. People didn't do that until, I think it was probably the 50s when people actually started going to the gym. I think it was San Francisco in the 50s where the first gyms were developed. And there's nothing wrong with going to the gym, but it's not a substitute for moving in other ways and for getting outside.
Speaking of science experiment, I feel like another massive science experiment has been this whole push towards energy efficiency.
Exactly.
And I want to help connect some dots here because this kind of mirrors or has this synergy with what I do for a living as an indoor air quality expert. But basically, 1970s, Richard Nixon's president, right? We have this global energy crisis, which, it was probably propped up by some other agenda, right?
Right.
And we start going towards energy efficiency. I mean, when I say going towards it, I mean like steam engine, full stop, we are becoming as efficient as possible. But I don't think they understood the consequences at the time, right? Because you talked about being outside all the time. Well, one big shift is we've become the indoor generation.
Right.
We spend 90% plus of our time indoors. And then think about, we have this energy efficiency push, which means we have to actually have air exchange from indoors and outdoors virtually zero. Like the goal is basically, today they're talking about sealing up your house. So you've just no air exchange. It's just, you live in this toxic box, right? Breathing the air inside these things, 20,000 breaths per day.
Right.
And what do you think is going to happen? Well, you're going to have mold because mold's part of our ecosystem.
Right.
Loves to feed off the building materials we build our houses out of. You're going to have an abundance of bacteria because guess what? We're walking human compost, right? We produce bacteria. We're going to shed and yield bacteria.
Right.
You have viruses. Of course, we're going to have people over. They're going to bring viruses. We have viruses in us. All of these things are going to be recirculating inside of our home. And then we're going to be breathing all of that stuff in with no fresh air to exchange with.
Exactly. I mean, there's, old time medicine. And we've gone through different iterations of those ideas in terms of history. But sunshine and fresh air used to be considered a spa treatment. Heliotherapy, they would take people to places where they had really a lot of sun exposure, vitamin D. And of course, you need to have fresh air. But, there's been a lot of confusion about that. If you look at the history, should a sick person be in a room that's dark and close all the windows? Or should you open the windows? Should they be allowed outside? But for health, we have to have fresh air and sunshine. Yeah. I mean, look at what's happening with our children. They're sitting inside in front of screens and they're breathing the type of air that you're talking about. They're not moving around. And so they're getting very little circulation. And of course, then you have in the house, because things are so closed up, you have those nice dark places, some of them moist. Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I've heard they saw a little something, they took out the tile and what was growing behind it was,
something
a real,
from a horror movie.
Right, exactly. Something out of an old horror movie. And it didn't quite reach out and grab them, but they knew that they'd been exposed to it.
So, I mean, it makes really good sense going outside and breathing fresh air, getting that UV light from the sun, right? That the spa treatment, as you called it. Right. But what's today's spa treatment? Is it screens and Vicodin? And what are these kids doing today as spa treatments? Because obviously it's not as simple as it should be, which is just going outside and having that fresh air. Well,
of course, in some of the schools now, they don't even let them go out for recess. And one of the reasons for that is because we've had so much litigation, because one thing that Americans really like to do is sue each other. And so if a child gets injured because they fall off the monkey bars or swings or whatever, then the parents can sue the school. And then, of course, the degree of education that we offer to kids has declined. And so then kids have trouble in school. They need to be in school more. They shouldn't be outside. But of course, that just creates a really bad environment for children because they need to be outside. They need to be running around. They need to be exploring the natural world. And instead, they're in a classroom. And from what I understand, a lot of kids have now started just learning on computers. They don't have computer lab anymore where they would go one period and go learn about computers. Now they do everything on computers. And then you have all that blue light. And the other thing that we have is LED lights. And I just recently got a hold of some halogen and incandescent and changed my work environment for my home office. And I could tell the difference immediately.
Wow.
I just felt so much more calm. And there's some research coming out of Stanford now, which is talking about the effects of the LED lights might be much worse than we have any idea. That the way that they might be affecting our mitochondria, which are the little engines inside the cells. And if you don't have mitochondrial function, then you're never going to be healthy. And this, of course, is also affected by food and by pathogens that you're mentioning. All these things that interfere with natural cellular function are turning out to be a really serious problem. And it doesn't really have to be this way. I mean, we can change some, simple things fundamentally, but the building material issue is pretty interesting because obviously we're not building our own homes.
Right.
And I know that there's a lot of toxic materials also. Of course, we're not using very many natural materials in any way anymore. Fabrics, we've gone to, synthetics. I just saw something that the Secretary Kennedy talked about. Instead of putting things in plastic bags, because we can't just overnight eliminate all these things that we've gotten used to, you use parchment paper. So you wrap things in parchment paper, then you can put it in plastic, and the plastic isn't going to leach. So there's a lot of things that we have to learn we can't get out of this toxic environment completely, but we have to learn how to deal with it, how to detoxify, and how to protect ourselves.
No, that makes great sense. I always try to say to people, health doesn't have to be so complicated. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of complicated options should you want to really indulge in some of these things. But the fundamentals is really clean air,
right,
clean water, clean food.
Right.
And I know it sounds really easy. We make it really difficult to get those three things.
Yeah,
in
we
America,
make it expensive too.
And very expensive.
Right.
But that's the simplicity of what we need to kind of focus on. Right. And so I think we've really lost sight of that because medicine itself has gotten complicated, has it not? I mean, it sounds simple. You get sick, you take a pill. Right. It sounds simple. But if you actually think about what goes into making that pill, it's very complicated. Right?
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't work that way.
There you go.
You don't just naming a disease or naming a condition and then giving a chemical to try to suppress that condition. That's not medicine. If you think about the father of medicine was Hippocrates. He was actually a nutritionist and a herbalist. And that's the foundation of medicine. And so many of the medicines we have today were developed from plants. But they just synthesized them, made them in a laboratory so they could patent them. And then that causes problems. You take a herb, and herbal medicine is real medicine, and it can be very strong. So you do need some guidance. I don't recommend people just go out and take anything. Although in America, really, some of the herbs that are for sale, they really aren't that strong because there's no regulation. But you can get good ones, if you know what you're doing, and they can be very powerful. There's so many natural medicines that we can use. And again, we're so removed from nature, but it doesn't take too much to get back to some real things that the body is very compatible with. And that's really what we're talking about. So if you want to treat a condition, you want to find out what caused the condition to develop in the first place.
Brilliant. I mean, that's what root cause means, right?
That's what
you
root
want to
cause
find
is.
the root cause of what is actually causing the condition.
That's right.
Right. And the symptom is just a mechanism to understand that something's wrong, right?
Exactly.
Most people, they want relief from that symptom, sure, but they have to do the work to figure out what's causing that symptom. Because if you don't address that, then you're going to basically just introduce some new substance to just suppress that symptom, right?
Well, not only that, but if you do suppress a symptom, the condition itself won't get better. So you may get worse in the long run. Then you have the consequences of the pill or the chemical. And very often that makes something else sick in the body. And then sometimes that produces another symptom. And then you'll get another synthetic pill or drug to handle that symptom. And then pretty soon you're on a whole cocktail called polypharmacy. And you've never really gotten back to what happened in the first place. But the thing is, we have been taught that there is, supposed to be a drug for everything and it's just not true. So what I find is that very often a person will have something going on, but the doctor will ignore that because they're not taught what to do about that. So they'll find a diagnosis, give a drug, and they're just not asking the right question. So much of it goes back to, the right question. For example, high blood pressure. The body doesn't just decide one day, oh, let's do this harder or higher or whatever. There's a reason for it. And so just giving a drug that makes you pee more, which is diuretic, which is standard, that doesn't fix the problem. What is the problem? Are you not filtering well? Are your blood vessels not strong enough so that the pressure is kept at a good level? I'm not saying ignore blood pressure, but I'm saying that there are things that often can be done to help mitigate it. Stress relief. There's several things that you could look at. And then you're doing real medicine and you're helping the person be healthier. And then the symptom goes away, which is how it should work.
It's kind of really interesting. My childhood is like flashing before my eyes right now because I'm just recalling sitting in front of a TV and you get all these drug commercials all day long, just indoctrinating me on like, oh, you take this drug and then whatever. But one thing I always paid attention to is like the part that makes you want to laugh is like, if you take this drug, you will need 7 more drugs to combat the side effects from this drug. You may even die, but that's okay because at least you'll die happy because you've handled the symptom that you were trying to handle in the first place. Right. Even as a kid, like just watching TV and I don't know, watching whatever I watched, Sonic the Hedgehog, but I would just be like, this doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And today as an adult, I sit here before and you're talking and I'm just like, my head is spinning and I'm just like, what are we doing? Like, we're not handling the right problem.
Yeah, we're not. And one of the worst things about it, I think, is that, and I've run into this, I've been doing this 30 years, so I have a pretty good experience with people. And I treat people in England under their National Health Service, and I've treated people in the United States. And sometimes people don't have the money for natural medicine. They'll go do something like have their gallbladder removed because their insurance will cover it, even though it would be possible to actually improve the gallbladder function with, given some time with the right natural medicine, but they just can't afford it. And of course, we have the problem of people not being able to afford real food either. I mean, where do we get to the point where I know synthetic food is less expensive because it's chemicals and it doesn't take as much to, make something in a laboratory as it does to grow something and nurture it and do what traditional farming did. But now we have people who don't even eat real food. And how can you possibly expect them to be healthy?
Yeah. I've got a button on stupidity. So I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay.
What you just described reminded me of like how it translates in the work that I do. Let me give you an example. So the whole gallbladder removal story to me just like remarkably reminded me of a situation where I go to a house and it's a military house on a base and there's a water problem. The ceilings are caving in because there's a water problem. Do you know what they decided the solution would be?
No. Right.
To install pieces of wood that would stop the ceiling from caving in. Not address the water problem, which by the way, it was just because they converted to a hot roof and then installed the insulation on the wrong side. Oh. Very simple stuff. Like they could have just moved the location of the insulation. But no, they bought wood, spent all this money to buy all this wood, paid all these people to nail and screw the wood up into the ceiling. And the problem was still there. So it's like, when you think about, we'll pay for that. The insurance companies are paying for that, which doesn't solve the problem, which costs more to not solve the problem than to solve the problem in the first place. They'll pay for that. They'll pay for the gallbladder to be removed. Right? They'll pay for that. But that the medicine that would solve the gallbladder from needing to be removed in the first place, they won't pay for that, which would be cheaper, by the way, than removing the gallbladder.
Yeah. And actually, you could do it with just food if you knew what you were doing. You wouldn't even necessarily have to take supplements. But in the gallbladder situation, for example, you actually could probably fix it to a great degree just with not, fairly simple ingredients. But we're used to not fixing food as medicine. We're used to food that just tastes good and that gives you that, kick, and you can drive through and buy it and eat it in your car. And we're not used to actually having to take responsibility for looking at food as medicine. And, in your example, it's kind of similar, actually going to the trouble and going to the effort of figuring out what the problem really is and then fixing it so that it's a done deal is, it takes a lot of ability to, just confront the situation and want to have a real solution as opposed to a Band-Aid.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to confront the fact that we're not confronting right now, and my mind is blowing.
Yeah.
It's really a sad story, because if you start to like look and take apart all the money that we spend on the wrong things, the solution would be within our grasp, and I think that's really part of the problem. I'm curious, how did we get here? Like, from your perspective, how did we get here? I mean, obviously we've rewarded the wrong things, right? We've made it easy to make money off of things that don't actually work. Right. And we haven't penalized those things where we should have. From your perspective, how did we get here?
Well, I think that if you look at, again, the history of the development of science, so World War II, we developed a lot of chemicals and advanced a great deal chemically. And I'll tell you something kind of anecdotal, but funny about my own family history. My husband, the father of my kids, his great uncle is Frederick Wöhler, and he synthesized the first substance in a laboratory, which was urea, which comes from urine, which is basically pee. And so my joke to my husband was always, he came home one day and said, "Darling, guess what I did in the lab today? We made pee." And his wife said, "We don't have enough pee in the world." But urea is used today in cosmetics it's a humectant, and it's used for a lot of purposes. So we learned to make things synthetically, and Frederick started the whole thing. So then World War II, we made a lot of advances. honestly, the Germans were way ahead. If you look at the German word for nitrogen fertilizer, Germans always have these big, long descriptive, but it means food without air, food made from air, because there's no substance. So that's why we have, giant fruits and vegetables that don't have a lot of nutrient value, because you can jack them up with the synthetic fertilizer. So we made all these advances. We actually brought some German scientists over here after World War II. And then we started down this path of, thinking that science was going to fix all our problems. But again, analog bodies, not synthetic. So all these synthetics don't work well with us. We can't process them. And then they do cellular damage, and they cause a lot of disruption in the normal pathways of the body. And so that's where it all started.
Basically, once we started living off the land here and went in a different direction, we started creating all these different chemicals that obviously we have become very popular and have, some might argue, increased quality of life. Although I would say that, depends on how sick you are to enjoy that quality of life, right? But,
right.
I think that sounds pretty interesting, because obviously that ties into drugs, because they're all chemicals as well, right? And so we've gotten into this whole synthetic mindset of, well, how do we just make things easier and make more money off those things? By the way, I mean, a lot of these companies are posting like 800% record profits on these drugs and chemicals.
Yes, exactly. And they're really not held responsible for any of the problems they create either. And I think that's the biggest issue. You're talking about statistics and whether you reward things or not. But if you make people sick, And in some cases, you make people die. There have been a lot of lawsuits that were settled out of court. There have been huge fines to the Justice Department. But what about the people who suffered?
Yeah.
And there's just not enough consequences. And we're not thinking this through either. We're sort of, everybody's busy. Do we all have time to source all the best places to buy everything? It used to be that you would have your, fruit in one place and vegetables and go to the butcher and get your bread someplace else. And, you had time to go to all these places. And then we got grocery stores. And so who has time to go back and source? I do know somebody who does that. And he works for himself and he can take the time to go. And they eat fantastically well. It's very expensive. And, I think it would be ideal, but it's hard for me to have time to do that.
Sure. When I think about when I zoom out and think about all of this, we have this obvious issue with chemicals and making everything synthetically. Obviously, we have the issue of them, making record profits. Mm-hmm. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is how these products come to market. For example, some of them have to get FDA approval, right? Some of them have to get different types of approval, I guess, depending on if it's a pharmaceutical drug, supplement, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But in terms of these trials, right? People can and do die in these trials, and they could still release the drug.
Well, of course, the problem again is the crossover in industry. So you have FDA, and then you have pharmaceutical, and the FDA is supposed to be the watchdog. But in the 70s, I think it was, you started having executives go back and forth, serve on the FDA, then go back to private sector. And so at that point, you stopped having, who's in charge of the hen house?
No checks and balances, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a system. I think we're seeing some things coming to light and some things being fixed. I think there's a lot of transparency occurring right now. So we have a ways to go, but I do think that the current team that is at FDA, CDC and such, I think they're more aware, and I think they're trying to do what they can. But of course, this has been a big ship, and turning it, it's not going to be overnight.
Well, on top of that, we don't know how long the administration's going to be in power, right? You're going to get changes of the administration throughout time. We don't know what the next administration is going to do and what their marching orders will be and how they're going to, move the ship forward. And so you've got this ebb and flow. You've got a pendulum that swings back and forth, right? And so that's just what it is.
Sure.
So there's no guarantee. And if we don't educate ourselves,
right,
then we're going to be the adverse effect of this.
Yeah. And it's not easy. It really isn't easy. There's so many ideas out there. There's so many philosophies, diets. Should you be carnivore? Should you be keto? Should you be vegan? It's very confusing. And it takes a lot but it's so important because, as you mentioned earlier, if you're not healthy, there's, it doesn't matter how much money you have. And you can't really just throw money at it. I think that was true for a while in our history. I think, if you could afford the best surgeon and that's still true to some extent, but, I've had a lot of situations where a medical doctor stopped a natural medicine program or objected to it. And, a lot of my patients tell me, I don't tell my medical doctor what I'm doing because I know they're not going to agree. But if it's something that doesn't go against whatever, the medical doctor is trying to do, then the person has to take individual responsibility. So it's, but more and more I'm hearing that the doctors are saying, good, it's working, you're doing better, keep going. So there is a shift occurring. And I think the pandemic really brought a lot of this to light. I think a lot of people started waking up. I think a lot of doctors started waking up. And so now we're definitely at a bit of a crossroads here. And it will depend on on our leadership, how fast we can change it, how much we can change it. But people really do, you have to get educated. I mean, when you think about what did you learn in school about the body? Hardly anything, right?
Right.
And we do need to change that, because how the body works internally, it is, if you start to kind of understand, I'll take smoking, for example. I have people who are, older, who are still smoking, and they have a health issue, and they don't even understand that why do we breathe? We breathe because at the bottom part of the lungs, there are places where the blood and the oxygen exchange. So now you've got oxygen going into the bloodstream, going to the cells, because the mitochondria need oxygen to work. But how many people know that that's really what happens? Or do they think that, the lungs expand, the air goes in, the lungs collapse again, and air goes out? Well, actually, CO2 goes out. And so that's there's an actual gas exchange that occurs that is absolutely vital. And if you don't have sufficient oxygen at a cellular level, you're wide open for cancer. But does anybody tell anybody that?
No.
But there was a Nobel Prize in medicine for that very thing, for how the oxygen is so vital and it helps prevent a cell from mutating. And how many people know that cancer cells work off of sugar? They don't work off the normal pathways that healthy cells work off of. So one of the things that you can do to stay healthy is stay off sugar. Sugar and cigarettes, probably two of the worst things as far as ingesting. And I always say that, just as you're talking about with the with that housing situation and, actually having a sick house,
Yeah.
or living in the house and being a sick person in the house, we don't have control over all these things. We don't have control over how our houses were built. So you kind of have to control what you can. And you can control, how you shop and where you eat. And you can control learning a little bit more about how these things work. And you definitely can control it used to be, there was a French paradox. So they could smoke cigarettes, drink a lot of wine, eat foie gras, and all these, heavy foods. And they were way healthier than Americans. That ship sailed. That's not true anymore, because the entire Western world has gotten much sicker. We have many more commercial interests that are, trying to sell us things that make us sick so they can make money, and not caring about, what it does to our not just our health, but the health of our children. And so so you do have to become educated about these things. And some of my patients, I learn things from them. It's wonderful. I certainly can't read everything and stay on top of everything. So it's really great when people, share their information with each other like we're doing now.
Yeah. It makes so much sense, because actually it was just like 2 years ago, I believe, I was cancer research out of UK. They did a study and showed that air quality was the second largest cause of cancer behind smoking cigarettes. It makes sense, because what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have enough oxygen being exchanged in the bottom of the lungs,
Right.
you're going to prevent cancer.
Right.
If you don't have enough oxygen being exchanged at the bottom of the lungs, right, your increase of cancer risk goes up.
Sure.
Which is very interesting, because obviously smoking can disrupt that process,
Mm-hmm.
and breathing in a ton of particles and mold and bacteria and things that your lungs have a hard time filtering out, right? This obviously can be a detriment.
Huge factor.
Yeah.
Huge factor. It's interesting, having lived in the UK for several years, their houses, when I was there anyway, were much less sealed.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was remembering, it's less comfortable, but they were much more used to the elements. And, because the weather is it's rainy, damp. And so they were they're much more used to just dealing with the elements, but I think we want to be comfortable. We want our environment to be perfect, the thermostat and the air conditioning and And, but forgetting that there still has to be the airflow and the outside has to be embraced.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just pull the string a little bit on just the overall health scene, right? So we talked about how doctors have been largely misinformed.
Mm-hmm.
So then it goes back to the schooling that doctors go through as being one of the problems. Well, who put together the schooling, and why have we not really shown doctors that food is medicine, air is medicine, sunlight is medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we only showing them that there's a pill for every label and you need to put labels on people?
Well, the old saying, a customer cured is a customer lost. So it really goes back to the petroleum industry. John D. Rockefeller was very instrumental in expanding the petroleum market, not just taking over the car market and in terms of oil and gas, but also what else could you do with petroleum products? Petroleum's carbon-based. So many things on the planet are carbon-based. But again, when you alter them in the laboratory, then you can create these chemicals, and now you've got a pharmaceutical industry. And so in order to have an industry grow, people were using homeopathy, which is very, very tiny dose medicine developed in Germany in the 1700s, can be extremely effective, but it has to be understood. Herbal medicine, people have been using, every culture in the world has its own plant medicine. And then, eating real food, because that's what you had. That's what normally grows, is real food. Then people weren't that unhealthy as long as they had enough food. And, then it's great because we did develop, some antibiotics and some real life-saving medicine. But what they wanted was more medicine for more people. And so what do? You start to make things that are kind of ordinary part of being a human being, and you start to turn them into diseases. I think ADHD is a perfect example of that. I mean, how many people are focused all the time? How many little boys in school can sit in school all day and stare at and not be allowed to run around and have recess? How many kids really were saved by having art and music and other things in school, because the way school is taught traditionally is not very interesting. It's a lot of repetition, and it's a lot of sitting still. And so, I think the way we raised our kids and such, and again, we got away from them being on the farm and being outdoors and becoming competent in the physical universe. And you have to be very abstract and significant when you're dealing with some of the concepts in school. And so then, people can't focus. And then you have all the social media and all the input of the flashing lights and the pictures and everything. And so I tell people, talk to me about memory, because I treat people who, as they are getting a little bit older, I can't remember things anymore. How many things do we have to remember compared to our great grandparents? They had very little. They remember their address, but now we have passwords and we have all this complicated technical stuff, and then we're wondering why we can't, remember everything. And, we're kind of hard on ourselves that way. So then what should we do? Should we go take a drug to remedy that and give us that edge? Or should we calm down a little bit and try to make life a little less frenzied and crazy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm.
So we covered a lot, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to know from your perspective, what's the biggest lie that we get from the medical community that you'd like to clear the air on?
Probably the biggest lie is that it's genetic and there's nothing you can do about it. And you're going to be on this drug for the rest of your life. And, that's, again, the medical doctors think that, but they're just not trained to try to actually fix a problem. And so, the answer to, well, why can't you fix it? Oh, it's genetic. But very small percentage is actually genetic. There's an old saying that genetics loads the gun. So let's say you even get a gene that could potentially mutate, but epigenetics fires the gun. And epigenetics is the environment, the food, relationships. There's many, many factors in, and this has been documented. These are all really important things. So we need to have close relationships. We need to have health foods. We need to have access to, real medicine, natural medicine, and we need to be in environments that are less toxic. Yeah. And we can certainly move towards that. But again, if you don't know any better, how many people have issues with mold and such, but they don't even know? At least now it's getting more recognized.
It is, but I think, I deal with this every day. So I will tell you that many people don't realize. And I think that's why you get a lot of people that tune into shows like this and they're curious and they want to know. And maybe they order a test like the dust test and they start to get a sense of what's going on in their environment because they've been curious. But the reality of it is many people don't know. And it starts with when they don't feel well, when they go to their doctor, the doctor's not asking.
Right.
Have you had any water damage lately? Anything change with your environment? No, they gloss right over that and just go, what label can I put on you and what drug can I tell you to take? And I think that's largely part of the problem. And look, I get it. There's probably some situations where there's some life-saving drugs out there, and I'm not trying to rain on everybody's parade or throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we shouldn't start there.
Right.
We should start with, well, what has changed, right? What's going on all of a sudden that you would now feel this way? And I feel like if we just kind of started to have that care,
sure,
we would actually get the change we're looking for, which is helping people get healthy. And so, yeah, it's a pretty significant issue.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we also don't understand all these little organisms. Just the term germ, makes people, but germ just means something that started. It's not necessarily something bad. Most of the bacteria around us, and there's tons of bacteria, is actually helpful. And in fact, we have tons in our body, but we have to kind of recognize that there are molds and funguses and things. And again, mushrooms are, and I don't mean magic mushrooms, I mean medicinal mushrooms, the real mushrooms like cordyceps, for example, in a test tube has actually been shown to kill cancer cells. So there's a whole area, we've had herbs, we've had different types of plant medicine. And in Chinese medicine, they've used mushroom medicine for a long time. But we're just learning more about this. But it's a fungus. And, people talk about candida and yeast and, then, some of the molds aren't dangerous and then some are very toxic.
Right.
And so it's really important to know the difference and what you need to be worried about and what you need to be careful of and what you need to clean out, not from your house, but also from your body if you've been exposed. And this is fairly new. I think I've only even really run into this half the time I've been practicing. It didn't used to be recognized much at all. Totally. And there's different levels of sensitivity. I've been around somebody in a situation where we were at a conference one time, and she's very sensitive. And I think once you've had an exposure, you're probably more sensitive. And I ended up treating her. It was just ridiculous how strong. I felt nothing. Most of the other people felt nothing, but she really, really got sick. And she knew it was mold, and didn't seem to be anything else. So her sensitivity to where we were. Now, none of the rest of us were happy that we were in an environment like that,
right.
But you're at a conference, what are you going to do?
Right.
It's, and we need more people, honestly, who can advise us about this sort of thing. And there aren't enough of us yet.
That's right. We're working on that.
Yeah.
We're working.
Right.
Change is coming.
Right.
It starts with having conversations like this, and that's why I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. And I'm not going to let you go just yet. I've got a few more questions. But
okay.
One of the things that I want to know about is, conspiracies. they're fun for a reason because sometimes they're true.
Sometimes they end up being true.
Sometimes they end up being true.
Mhm.
But they can be very captivating. People love to
Mhm.
spread conspiracies. I'm
Mhm.
curious, in recent history, what are some of the conspiracies you've come across that actually turned out to be true?
Well, I would say that the conspiracies about some of the vaccines and the uh, various medications have turned out to be true. I think that if you look at again there's something that's come up recently with foods, for example, that the tobacco industry turned their chemical engineers towards the food industry. And that's why food is so different when even junk food like cookies and such are very different and much less healthy, if you will, than when I was growing up. And they're much less substantial so that you feel like you have to eat a lot more. So chemically engineering things. And I think that with certain medicines, like for example, with vaccines, you're taking healthy people and giving them a drug that has a lot of very strange things in it. And I think if people ever saw what's actually in the vaccines, they would be much more hesitant about injecting those things into their body. So, we've been kind of led down a primrose path, so to speak, on some of these things and claiming that they're healthy when there is evidence that there are problems and when there isn't the evidence that they're really healthy. So there seems to be something in science right now that if you just say it's true often enough, that it's supposed to be expected to be true instead of let's actually make sure it's true.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I do, obviously the vaccine conversation has become highly controversial.
Mm-hmm.
You've got, people on one side saying vaccines are, highly toxic and very problematic. You got people on the other side saying that, vaccines are life-saving and we're going to capture malaria again if we don't have vaccines and things of that nature. And so from your perspective, help us understand what is the why behind vaccines being problematic in the first place. I get that you can explain this probably in a very calming and affirmative manner so that people can actually digest the information, no matter which side of the fence they might be on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that again, I really like looking at the history of things because if you're just looking at what's going on right now, then you're going to get caught in this. But if you look at the history of vaccines, they've been problematic since the very beginning. They had riots against the smallpox vaccine. And the whole idea that you can vaccinate is actually pretty controversial because a normal pathway would be an exposure through, through a different type of contact. You're not actually injecting something right into the bloodstream. The body has defenses. And so if something has to go in through, because you breathe it or because you eat it or things like that, there's defenses along the way. That's the entire body is kind of an immune system to begin with.
Right.
But if you take something, and the problem is, let's say that you weaken a bacteria or a virus, and you weaken it, and then you take it and you just inject it. The body will pretty much ignore it. It won't really accept it as a disease. So it won't mount what you want, which is an immune response so that it recognizes if it gets exposed to that vaccine, that illness again, that pathogen, bacteria or virus. So it's not that simple. And so they tried to do with smallpox, they tried to do, put it under the skin and such. And people died. People who didn't have a good, robust immune system or their body hadn't recognized smallpox from before, had been exposed before, they had terrible responses. So there were actual riots about the smallpox vaccine. And so, and then if you look at the history of polio, for example, because people always pull up polio as the the thing where we really save kids' lives. But there's some evidence, you talk about a conspiracy theory, that was actually a toxic exposure, that they were using certain substances to protect against moths with trees. And so if you look where polio started, it was right around the area where they started using some very toxic substances. We had no idea about toxins. Asbestos was used to decorate, make molding and such in living rooms. And then people got very, very sick. We've made tremendous mistakes along these lines. Look at DDT and pesticides and things like that. So we've caused illnesses, blamed it on a bacteria potentially, developed a treatment, a vaccine, and then if you mandate it, then they make a lot of money. Now, most people are fairly rational in the sense that if they really think that something is helpful, they'll do it voluntarily. Why do you have to mandate? I think that's one of my biggest objections. That you would force people to do any kind of medical treatment against their will. We have religious exemptions. There are definitely fetal cells in some of the vaccines, and some people don't want human fetal cells to be injected into their body. So it's, these are very important concepts. And I don't think it's just a matter of letting legislative bodies decide for us. And if a person is vaccinated and chooses to vaccinate, why are they so worried about somebody who isn't vaccinated? Because that person is supposedly at risk, but how does it make them at risk?
I did always wonder that. Yeah. I was always wondering that. But I try to learn from the best like yourself and take all of this in and try to make the best decision I can for me and my family. And it's tough. It's not easy, right? Because there's a lot of false information out there.
It is tough. It's very tough for parents because the worst thing in the world is worrying about your child and whether your child is sick or not.
Absolutely.
So now you can do homeopathic preparations that help stimulate the immune system. It's a pretty safe way to go. And it was used a lot in the past, but very few people have access to the kind of homeopath or homeopathic medicine who could do that sort of thing. So we don't have to just not protect our children. But I think the most important thing about staying healthy is having a robust immune system. And you can't have a robust immune system if you're eating bad food, if you're living in a house that has, pathogens growing in the corner, or you're injecting substances like cigarettes and recreational drugs and things that are going to weaken your body and weaken you mentally. So I think that it just takes a lot more these days you have to pay a lot more attention. You have to protect yourself against a lot more things. And, it can get to be a lot. But again, in natural medicine, we say, you pay now or you pay later.
Right.
I mean, it's
usually cheaper now than later.
It's also usually less painful.
Yeah.
But it just depends. I mean, we've gotten very, very used to lots of good tasting things. And, it didn't used to be that way. If you had enough food, you were happy. How it tasted was secondary.
Things have changed there, for sure.
Right. But people can, if they start to change how they eat, the body will get used to it, and the body will actually like the good food. And the body is almost too adaptable that way. It will go after the cheap thrill of the synthetic chemicals and all the sugar and everything. But if you start to eat really, really healthy food, and particularly organic if you can afford it, your body will start to want that. And so you kind of have to teach your body and train your body not to, just like you have to get it out of bed in the morning. You have to be in charge.
Right. So before you go today, I want to touch on stem cells.
Okay.
So I know you're doing amazing things in the stem cell world. Can you
Mhm.
share what it is that you're doing and how
Sure.
stem cells are helping to shape the future?
Well, I've known for a long time that everything happened at a cellular level, that, the whole game is being played at a cellular level. If you talk about what is health, health is enough healthy cells in any organ and any system to perform the function so that that system or organ is working correctly. Then you're healthy. So stem cells are the basic. Everything starts with a stem cell, and then the stem cell, which is the egg, gets pollinated by the sperm, and then it's amazing what happens from there, and the whole body grows out of these stem cells. So we make stem cells throughout our lives in the bone marrow. And let's say that at age 25, somebody's in an accident, their stem cell activators from the site of the injury will go to the bone marrow and say, oh, come on, we need more. We've got something to heal. And so a 25-year-old heals really well. You start talking 60-year-old and they're injured and the stem cells are like, okay, we'll do our best. We will do it eventually and hopefully completely, but there's no real guarantee. So there's a company from Taiwan called PowerStem Biomedical, and they came up with a stem cell activator. And it just takes, again, natural substances. It's basically vegetarian. And they bioengineered it so that it has exactly the same substance. It's bioidentical to what your body would send out as a signal to make more stem cells. So it's not a stem cell product, it's a stem cell activator.
Mm.
And I'm using it with a lot of people. We're getting really good results. They also measure your own base stem cells. And then after you do the program, which takes 2 months, 60 days, we measure again. And for me, my stem cells doubled.
Wow.
In 60 days. And the difference, you're actually biologically younger at that point. You regenerate better. Your immune system is a lot stronger. And so it doesn't matter, we've known for a long time your chronological age did not match. People can be a lot older or a lot younger biologically. And blood work does tell you something, but my blood work was really great. My medical doctor was thrilled with my blood work. But then my base stem cells were not what I wanted them to be. They weren't like a 25-year-old. And so I know for myself, the difference I feel is really great because now my body can keep up with me, with what I'm trying to do because I am really busy. And it's quite a game changer.
Wow.
So I'm very excited about this because you can go get infusions of stem cells, but this country, we're not doing much along those lines yet. There's certain restrictions. You can do it with clinical trials, but you really much have to go outside the country, which is, much more expensive and such. So, sometimes so that marriage of natural substances plus some biotechnology is a really good way to go because you're not synthetically doing this. You're actually, like bioidentical hormones, you're actually finding substances that match what the body does naturally.
That's awesome. Well, you look amazing.
Thank you.
So I could tell that it's obviously working well for you.
Thank
What
you.
are some other expectations that someone would have on these types of programs in 60 days? I mean, feeling younger, what are some of the
Right.
anti-aging
Well,
principles?
Your stem cells are going to go where you need help. So whatever a person is dealing with, and they may not even know. There are some scans that you can do, some bioresonance scans and such, which show on a monitor how the organs are doing. And that's another way that we can measure whether people are getting better and whether the organ is regenerating. So there's, but that's what you want. You want, as the organs get older and the wear and tear, you want them to regenerate more. And you want the immune system, the natural killer T cells that go after infection and cancer and inflammation, you want more of those. You want more of the white blood cells. So we measure all this with blood work.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is. So people are definitely, so you don't just have the subjective, oh, I feel better, because there is such thing as placebo effect, and people will, if they think something's working, they will feel better. And that's been proven in science over and over again. But when you have the actual measurement of the blood work, then you know that there's actually something occurring in the body. And I've seen autoimmune problems get handled very often. That's something that could be expected. But again, they're not doing it. They're helping your body to have a more robust response, which is all you really want. And again, antibiotics can be life-saving, but the less, the better. So if you have your own healthy response, then you're going to need a lot less drugs.
That's amazing. Yeah. Less drugs is more better.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time of your very busy day to be here with us and have this amazing episode. Where can people find you?
They can find me at andunev.com. I'm Andunev on just about any of the social media sites, and I do quite a few podcasts, and they can sign up for my email because I do blog, and I have a lot of archives of blogs and such, right? You have to teach. Yeah. This is not about just, come in and get treated. You have to teach, and you have to help people understand how things work. I've had people tell me so often, or say to me, well, why didn't my doctor teach me this? Well, first of all, sometimes they don't know. And second of all, they don't have time. I'm not under that time constraint of I have to, see so many people a day. But, and we really have to help each other to be healthier. We're all kind of in this together.
Yeah.
And so it's really great. I really appreciate you having me on. And I really appreciate what you do too, because I can't do what you do. And
that's right. And I can't do what you do.
Right.
But we make a good team though.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for watching another episode of Never Been Sicker. I'm your host, Michael Rubino, and we'll see you next time.